Welcome to Be Wise, information about cannabis for older adults. Brought to you by Active Aging Canada, a national charity that supports older adults living well and remaining active. Production for this podcast was made possible through a financial contribution from Health Canada's Substance Use and Addictions Program. Now, let's go to the Active Aging Canada studios and join National Executive Director Patty Clark and Ward Maxwell, Director of Marketing and Communications. Today, using cannabis or starting again in later life, and cannabis and age-related change.
So today we'd actually like to continue our conversation about cannabis and aging. There's still so much more to share with you.
One of the things we wanted to talk with you about is starting to use cannabis or starting again in later life. These are some guidelines we're going to give you as to how to do that. First and foremost, be aware of the amount of THC that is in the cannabis product or strain you plan on using. We've already spoken about THC. It's the psychoactive part of the cannabis products, and it's going to affect your thinking. It may not make you happy if you try it out. So take it easy with that at the start. And that's our next point. Start at the lowest possible level and slowly increase the dose until you reach the desired effect. Our third guideline is simple. There are illegal synthetic cannabis products out in the market now. Avoid them. They're called K2, Spice. There is a great risk of bad side effects among older users because of their high potency. So don't use substitutes. Another guideline. Don't combine cannabis with any other recreational drug, including alcohol. If you have an addiction to alcohol or any other drug, you're at an increased risk for cannabis addiction. And we've also spoken about the effect of alcohol on cannabis earlier. Another guideline, use cannabis in a safe environment. If you're going to try out using cannabis, especially cannabis with THC, remember, THC is thought to connect with receptors in the body that affect coordination and balance. As we get older, falls become a greater concern. Your great safety precaution if you're going to try out using cannabis, find a comfy chair or a sofa where you're not going to be running around a lot. And finally, as we said to you, don't drive after consuming cannabis. It's illegal right off the top. And we're not going to advise you to break the law, but also we want you to be safe. And impairment can last up to 24 hours. So you have to be very careful. If you're using cannabis, don't drive.
I think it would be a good idea to wrap up our session and just do a review of what we've been talking about. We've had a lot of podcasts on some of the issues around aging and cannabis. And so I'd like to just wrap up with a few sort of final thoughts with cannabis and age-related changes. When younger people use THC recreationally, the concern is the impact on their developing brain. But for older people, the concern is that the cannabis affects the same parts of the brain that show age-related changes. So we do not know yet if the cannabis increases age-related mental decline. And as we said, there's lots of research going on, but we don't know the impact yet of this. We've also talked a lot about smoking, and we've said in the past that the smoking cannabis can lead to respiratory problems. It can increase your heart rate and your blood pressure, and these are both risk factors for stroke and heart disease. And as Ward has said many times, smoking anything is harmful to your lungs and can bring the same risks as cigarettes, cigars, pipes, and so on. We've chatted a bit about vaping cannabis, and that's where you're inhaling the vapor through the electronic device. And this is becoming a popular option. And it is deemed to be less harmful than smoking, but we know that it is not completely without harm. We do not know yet what the long-term effects are of inhaling the substances in vaping products. So once again, we really do not encourage smoking of any kind. And the final note is that if you or your family have a history of any mental health conditions, or if you have a mental health issue now, please avoid using any kind of cannabis recreationally.
Well, that's it for our podcast this week. And next week, we'll be back to you to talk about talking to your doctor about cannabis. Until then, thanks, Patty.
Thanks, Ward. Talk to you again next week.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. For more information, go to activeagingcanada.ca, where you can order a copy of our Be Wise booklet. It's available in 17 languages and is free. The views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily represent the views of Health Canada's Substance Use and Addictions Program. Join us for our next podcast, and until then, remember to be active, be healthy, and be wise.